It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun kissed the pavement just enough to remind everyone that summer was in full swing. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant hum of lawnmowers and the occasional bark of a dog. I was in my backyard, lounging by the pool with a cold drink in hand, enjoying the peaceful serenity of my own personal oasis. The water sparkled, the air was still, and for once, everything felt perfect. Then came the familiar sound, the sharp, deliberate click of heels against the sidewalk. A shadow loomed over my fence, and before I could even turn around, I heard the voice. "Excuse me." I sighed, setting my drink down. There was only one person in the entire neighborhood who spoke with that particular blend of authority and exasperation. Karen. She wasn't just any Karen, she was the Karen. The self-appointed guardian of the Homeowners Association, the watchdog of suburban tranquility, and the undisputed champion of unsolicited complaints. Her uniform of choice? A crisp polo, khaki capris, and the ever-present clipboard, a weapon of mass irritation. I turned, offering my best attempt at a polite smile. "Afternoon, Karen. Something I can help you with?" Her eyes darted to the shimmering pool behind me, then back to my face. "I couldn't help but notice that you have a private pool." I blinked. "Yep. That's how it works when you have one built in your own backyard." She let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head like a teacher disappointed in a student. "You know, I've been reviewing the HOA guidelines, and it's really in the best interest of the community if private pools are made available to residents." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh really? And where exactly does it say that?" She pursed her lips, tapping a perfectly manicured finger against her clipboard. "Well, there's an understood rule about sharing amenities. It's just neighborly." There was the Karen logic. Rules that didn't actually exist but were suddenly gospel the moment she decided they should be. I exhaled, already exhausted. "Karen, this is my property. My pool. I paid for it, I maintain it, and I'm the only one who decides who gets to swim in it." She gasped, clutching her clipboard to her chest like I'd just insulted her entire existence. "You mean, you're refusing to allow your neighbors to use it? That's incredibly selfish." I stared at her, debating whether to explain the concept of private ownership to a grown woman. But before I could speak, she huffed, took a step back, and scribbled something onto her clipboard. "This isn't over," she declared, spinning on her heel. I shook my head, chuckling as I picked up my drink. I should have known better. With Karen, nothing was ever over. It was just the beginning. The next morning, as I stepped outside to grab the mail, I found an envelope taped to my front door. In bold, aggressive letters it read, "HOA Notice of Violation." I sighed before even opening it. There was only one person in the entire world who would bother delivering a handwritten HOA complaint directly to my door. Sure enough, inside was a neatly typed letter that read like a legal summons but, in reality, was just a list of nonsense complaints. Violations. Failure to maintain a community-friendly pool policy. Non-compliance with HOA spirit of neighborly cooperation. Unapproved fence design. Literally the same fence as everyone else's. Excessive water usage because apparently my pool personally offended Karen. I let out a slow breath, staring at the paper like it might magically make sense if I looked hard enough. Spoiler, it didn't. Before I could even crumple it up, I heard the telltale sound of Karen clearing her throat behind me. I turned, and there she was, standing on my driveway with the smug energy of someone who had just won something. "I see you got the notice," she said, folding her arms triumphantly. "Oh, I got it," I replied. "And I also got a few questions. Like, for starters, what on earth is an HOA spirit violation?" She scoffed. "It's the principle of it. You're disrupting the harmony of our community." I blinked. "By having a pool? By refusing to share it?" I let out a dry laugh. "Karen, it's my private pool. It's not a neighborhood amenity. It's literally in my backyard." She ignored my logic, flipping open her clipboard and scanning her notes. "This isn't just about the pool anymore. I've been monitoring your property and I've noticed several concerns." I narrowed my eyes. "You've been what?" She didn't even flinch. "Your grass is exactly 1/4 inch taller than HOA regulations allow. Your mailbox is a slightly different shade of white than the approved color palette. And," she peered around me toward my backyard, "your pool area doesn't meet the open access encouragement clause." I snorted. "That's not a thing." She huffed. "It should be. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Karen, unless you can show me a real written rule that says I have to let random people into my pool, this conversation is over. She narrowed her eyes. Fine. But don't be surprised when you receive an official HOA citation. I waved my arms dramatically. Oh no. Not an official citation from the official clipboard of doom. Karen's nostrils flared. She spun on her heel and stomped away, muttering about escalating matters to the board. I shook my head watching her retreat. This was far from over. That evening as I sat on my patio sipping a well-earned drink, I decided to fight back. Not with aggression, but with something Karen couldn't comprehend. Logic and a little well-placed mischief. The first step was simple. I dug up the official HOA handbook, which Karen assumed no one actually read, and went through it with the same enthusiasm she probably had when policing the neighborhood. And guess what? Nowhere in the entire document did it say that I was obligated to share my pool. In fact, it clearly stated that personal property was private and under the sole jurisdiction of the homeowner, which, shocker, meant that Karen had exactly zero authority over it. The next morning, armed with my findings, I printed a copy of the relevant section, highlighted it in obnoxious neon yellow, and taped it right back onto my front door. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. A few hours later, as expected, Karen returned. She spotted the highlighted printout, squinted at it, and huffed so hard I swear I saw her bangs move. What is this? She snapped, waving the paper like it was personally offensive. Oh, just a little light reading, I said casually, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Turns out the HOA handbook says nothing about private pools being community property. Weird, right? She glared at me, her fingers tightening around her ever-present clipboard. You think this is funny? A little. Karen clenched her jaw and dramatically flipped to a fresh page on her clipboard. Fine. But if you refuse to cooperate, you leave me no choice but to ensure the entire neighborhood understands how difficult you're being. Oh no, I deadpanned. Not public shame. How will I ever recover? Karen narrowed her eyes and stormed off. That night I got 7 different HOA violation notices in my mailbox, all from Karen. 1 for excessive backyard enjoyment. 1 for improper color temperature of porch light. 1 for unauthorized wind chime. 1 for ambiguous fence height concerns, meaning nothing at all. It was pure nonsense. So, naturally, I did the only logical thing. I framed the most ridiculous one and hung it by my front door. The next morning Karen saw it. Her face turned an unnatural shade of red later that afternoon, as I was tending to my totally legal and completely non-community obligated backyard oasis. My next-door neighbor Tom strolled over, grinning like he had just won the lottery. So, he drawled, leaning against the fence, I heard you made it onto Karen's most wanted list. I chuckled. Oh, you mean my heinous crimes of using my own pool and existing in my own backyard? Yeah, I'm practically a fugitive. Tom laughed. You know, you're not the only one she's tried to pull this with. That caught my interest. Oh. Tom nodded. Last year she tried to tell me that my garden gnome was a visual nuisance and had to be removed. Apparently, she said it was staring at her window with bad intentions. I nearly choked on my drink. You're kidding. Oh, I wish I was, he said. But it gets better. She tried to call the HOA to fine my cat for trespassing. I stared at him wide-eyed. Your cat? Yep. He smirked. Apparently, socks wandering into her yard was a serious violation of property boundaries. Just then another neighbor, Lisa, popped her head over the fence, having clearly overheard us. Oh, are we sharing Karen horror stories? Because I've got a good one. Tom and I both turned to her interested. She once left a note on my car, Lisa said, shaking her head. You know what it said? Your vehicle's color disrupts the neighborhood aesthetic. Please consider a more neutral shade. I burst out laughing. You're joking. Lisa held up a hand. Swear on my overpriced HOA fees. By now we were all grinning and one by one more neighbors started casually joining in, each with their own absurd story about Karen's reign of HOA terror. Someone had been warned for their American flag being too flappy. Another was fined for having its suspiciously unregistered garden hose. One guy had his Halloween decorations reported as its safety hazard because a plastic skeleton startled Karen's dog. The best part? Every single one of us had gotten at least one nonsense violation for something utterly ridiculous. It was official. Karen wasn't just my problem. She was everyone's problem. And just like that, the community started to unite. That night, Tom texted me a photo. It was a kiddie pool set up in his driveway with a giant sign that said "Neighborhood Public Pool," just to troll Karen. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my chair. The neighborhood revolution had begun the next morning. I woke up to the sound of Karen's furious ranting outside. I grabbed my coffee, strolled onto the porch, and, oh wow. Karen was standing in Tom's driveway, red-faced and clutching her clipboard like it was a weapon of mass destruction. "This," she shrieked, pointing at the inflatable kiddie pool, "is a violation of HOA regulations." Tom, cool as ever, took a sip of his coffee and shrugged. "Oh, is it? Because according to the official HOA guidelines, there's no rule against temporary, seasonal water features." Karen nearly short-circuited. "That is not a feature. It's a mockery." Tom grinned. "No, it's a community-friendly pool. Just like you wanted." By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, watching the scene unfold like it was the season finale of a reality show. Karen, realizing she was losing control, flipped through her clipboard, searching for some kind of legal-sounding nonsense to throw at us. And then she did something so comically desperate I almost couldn't believe it. She whipped out a ruler. Like some kind of deranged school principal, she marched onto my lawn and knelt down to measure the height of my grass. "Your lawn is above regulation height," she snapped. "That's an automatic fine." I stared at her, completely stunned. "Karen, are you literally measuring my grass right now?" "It's 0.3 inches too tall," she declared, waving the ruler like a sword of HOA justice. "Violation." The crowd of neighbors erupted into laughter. At that exact moment, a golf cart rolled up. The HOA president, a tall, exhausted-looking man named Greg, stepped out, rubbing his temples like he had seen enough of Karen's nonsense for a lifetime. "What's going on here?" Greg asked, scanning the group. Before I could even open my mouth, Karen sprinted over to him, waving her clipboard wildly. "Greg, finally. I need you to take action. This homeowner is refusing to share their pool. This one is taunting the HOA, and this one," she whirled around, pointing at me, "has grass 0.3 inches above regulation height." Greg looked at her. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at Karen, kneeling in my yard, holding a ruler like she was conducting a scientific experiment. A long silence followed. And then Greg sighed. "Deeply. Karen," he said, rubbing his forehead, "we've had 6 different complaints about you this week." Karen blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you." Greg pulled out his own clipboard, a much more official-looking one than Karen's. "We have reports of harassment, fabricated violations, and," he glanced over at the kiddie pool, snorted, and kept reading, "excessive misuse of HOA authority." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Greg sighed. "You are no longer on the HOA board, effective immediately." A gasp rippled through the gathered neighbors. Karen froze. You can't do that. I am the only one enforcing the rules." Greg raised an eyebrow. "Karen, last week you tried to fine someone because their wind chimes were too whimsical. They were excessively musical." Greg ignored her. "As of now, you're no longer allowed to issue violations or speak on behalf of the HOA. If you continue, you will be fined." Karen let out a strangled noise of pure horror. The crowd was silent for half a second. And then, thunderous applause. People cheered. Tom high-fived me. Someone in the back popped open a beer. Karen stood there, shaking, speechless, absolutely stunned. Greg turned to me, nodded, and said, "Enjoy your pool." Then he drove off. Karen. She stormed away, defeated. And for the first time in a long, long time, the neighborhood felt peaceful. The days after Karen's downfall felt gloriously peaceful. For the first time in years, I could step outside without worrying about some ridiculous handwritten violation notice taped to my door. No more surprise inspections. No more passive-aggressive letters about my unneighborly pool policies. And the best part? The whole neighborhood reveled in it. Tom wasted no time decorating his yard with even more garden gnomes just because he could. Lisa proudly parked her bright red car in her driveway without fear of another aesthetic disruption complaint. Someone even hung up extra wind chimes just to be petty. Meanwhile, Karen? Oh, she tried to keep her self-imposed reign of terror going. Even after being stripped of her HOA power, she still walked around the neighborhood like a disgraced queen without her crown, clipboard clutched to her chest. Every now and then she'd dramatically write something down as if her notes still meant anything. But now, Nobody cared. Nobody listened. Her once feared violation notices? People started taping them right back onto her own door. One particularly glorious morning, Karen woke up to find an official-looking citation taped to her mailbox. Violation notice. Infraction. General Karen behavior. Penalty. Public embarrassment and loss of fake authority. Signed, the entire neighborhood. She ripped it down so fast I swear she gave herself whiplash. And then the final cherry on top. A few weeks later the HOA officially fined Karen for, oh the irony, violating HOA regulations. Turns out while she was too busy policing everyone else's property, she had completely ignored her own violations. Her grass? Too long. Her Christmas lights? Left up way past the deadline. Her mailbox? Slightly too close to the curb. It was poetic justice. She had spent years trying to fine and control everyone else, and now? She got hit with the very same HOA rules she weaponized against us. And for the first time ever, she had no one to blame but herself. With Karen finally dethroned, the neighborhood settled into something that had felt like an impossible dream just weeks earlier. Peace. Gone were the days of petty citations and clipboard tyranny. No more notes about mailbox heights, no more ridiculous complaints about wind chimes, and best of all, my pool remained blissfully private. Tom, ever the neighborhood comedian, decided to celebrate Karen's downfall the best way he knew how. One afternoon I stepped outside and nearly cried laughing when I saw it. Right in front of his house stood a brand new life-sized inflatable Karen. Clipboard and all. Above it, a sign that read, Neighborhood Safety Reminder. Beware of wild Karens. Lisa took a picture and sent it to everyone. Karen of course lost her mind when she saw it. But with her power revoked there was absolutely nothing she could do. And just like that she started avoiding us. Her patrols became less frequent. She stopped staring down people's lawns with her ruler in hand. And most importantly, she finally left me in my pool alone. The final victory came a few months later when Karen did something I never thought I'd see. She put her house up for sale. Whether it was from sheer embarrassment, her inability to control the neighborhood, or just her own karmic exhaustion, she was done. And when the moving truck finally pulled away, the entire block erupted into cheers. That night we threw the biggest backyard barbecue of all time, right next to my completely private, completely off-limits pool. Tom made a toast. To the end of the reign of terror, he declared, raising his beer. May her clipboard rest in peace. We all raised our drinks, and as I looked around I saw it. A real community. Not a Karen-controlled, rule-obsessed neighborhood, but a group of people who actually enjoyed living here. And with that life went on. The grass grew freely. The mailboxes stood proudly. And for the first time in a long, long time, we were finally Karen-free. Have you ever dealt with a Karen in your neighborhood? What's the most ridiculous thing they've tried to enforce? What's the worst HOA horror story you've ever heard or experienced? What do you think was the best way the neighborhood trolled Karen? If you were in my shoes, how would you have handled Karen? What petty revenge would you have pulled to get back at her? If you enjoyed watching HOA Karen completely lose it over my private pool, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and keeps me motivated to bring you even more wild HOA and neighbor drama. And if you love stories of entitlement, revenge, and satisfying karma, be sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Trust me, you won't want to miss what I've got coming next. Now tell me in the comments, what's the craziest HOA or neighbor story you've ever experienced?